I do appreciate everybody coming out tonight. I recognize the fact that you are giving up an opportunity to shop on the most significant mattress sales of the year by being here on President's Day, and it's not lost on me. So as you heard Caitlin say, my name is Mike Gerge. I'm an MBA. I work as a consultant, as a program engineer for one of the largest human capital management services in the world. That involves a ton of financial modeling and a ton of Q&A as far as looking at different environments and different financial scenarios and then trying to predict outcomes. So I got involved with student debt and with managing student loans about a little over 3 years ago when my wife Crystal was attending UGA here. She was starting her DVM and she came back from her orientation. She said, I have spectacular news. I was like, I love spectacular news. She said, we can borrow whatever we need to borrow. We can borrow whatever we need to borrow for my degree because in 20 years, it's all going to go away. And that sounded great, right? Has anybody here gotten advice similar to that or heard that? Right? Lots of heads nodding. I'm somewhat of a skeptic. I'm a big fan of philosophy in my off time. So as nice as that sounded, I kind of cocked my head to the side and said, okay, let's dig into this and figure out what this looks like. And the more I dug and the more I got into it, the more it became kind of this giant ball of yarn that we were trying to unravel for not just us and our family, because I think it's important to point out up front, I'm a borrower, right? So everybody in here that has student loan debt, I am speaking from a perspective of, in my house, with a DVM, in my house we have significant student loan debt as well. But it was important to go in and start sharing that information. And when we did that, we started first off by doing some financial modelers, going out and doing some talks, and then finally it culminated in us putting together an application for iPhone and for Android that we're going to walk through here towards the end of this talk. But really, the point of this talk is to take you through and not to give you a one-size-fits-all strategy. To me, that was the biggest downfall for every bit of student loan advice I had heard any speaker give, was if you always do X, you always get Y. And to me, that is boiling it down way too much, because everybody in this room is their own unique person, your own unique set of circumstances. You are going to go have your own unique career. You're going to make your own unique decisions. And at the end of that, if you expect that entering one factor in is going to get you a constant output, you are going to probably be sorely disappointed. I can't say you will 100% be disappointed, because one of you would probably be the winner in the always do this lottery. But most folks, it would not work out for them. So we're going to go through pretty standard agenda, but we're going to try and take it from a more practical approach. We're going to start off by looking at how we approach the subject. I mentioned earlier, I love philosophy, big philosophy guy, so I like to think about how I'm going to think about what we're talking about before we start off. So we're going to go ahead and look at cognitive biases. Everybody in this room is familiar with that when it comes down to scientific data, when it comes down to working in the lab. We're going to talk about cognitive biases of debt. We're going to talk about how it'll impact the decisions you make and even how you perceive where you're at in paying off your debt over time. Then we're going to take a look at the current state in our country. We're going to examine attitudes on debt. This is important because, again, debt anxiety, which is a term you'll hear me use a couple of times, is a very real thing. I think everybody in this room can probably identify with the fact that your debt is kind of, just sort of the thing you keep in the cupboard over here. Every now and then you pull it out, you look at it, you get really anxious about it, and then you shove it right back into the cupboard and you go back to school because you have Lord knows how many tests every week. I don't think I saw my wife the entire fourth year of vet school, so I totally get how that works out. Then we're going to go through repayment strategies and forgiveness programs. And spoiler alert, we're going to take a really long, hard look at practically evaluating forgiveness programs. Not everybody in this room will qualify. Not everybody in this room should enroll in forgiveness programs. If you've been told it's always the answer, well, we'll talk about it. It'll be fine. I'm not going to start us off on a down note, but definitely want to be honest up front. Then we're going to take a look at the application we talked about. That'll actually let you model out your financial outcomes. It'll let you take a look at your financial situation. And while it's not going to be a guarantee, right? You are trying to plan for between 20, 25 years worth of financial planning and do it in one go. We gave it our best shot, but that is a hard act to build. You will get a good idea of what you're looking at and what's coming down the road for you. And then finally, we're going to take a look at pending and potential changes as it relates to forgiveness programs. Because that's one of those things that's been very frustrating about this entire process. We started off, and our first talks were, hey, forgiveness programs are great. This is definitely the road you should go down. You know, get your education at a bargain price. And as we started unraveling it, and we started running into the application process and the approvals and the fact that no one was forgiven, no one was guaranteed forgiveness. I'll let you decide if that was a Freudian slip or not. But no one was guaranteed forgiveness. We realized that not just understanding the current state of the program, but understanding where the program may go in the future was critical to being able to manage this subject. So let's start with the cognitive biases. Expertise bias. This is one that I suffer from, maybe some of you, right? It's the belief that your expertise or your level of knowledge in a current field of study makes you more capable of managing another part of your life. You see this often. I'll give myself as an example. I'll throw myself out there. I am pretty good at finances, pretty good at modeling things out over time, which means I can remodel my bathroom, right? No problem. If my wife were here, you would get to see a really funny look on her face, but that does not work out that way all the time. So understanding that because you are an expert in one field of study, you don't have to put the pressure on yourself to go be an expert in finances. Don't decide to go earn, a doctorate on the side in understanding finances. Just go get a financial advisor. Get somebody with a fiduciary responsibility to give you good financial advice, and I promise some of, not all of, that dead anxiety that you have will go away. You'll know that you've at least got a plan and you've got an ally that can stay on top of all these changes, and they'll take something off of your plate. Authority bias is another one that's interesting. Authority bias plays a role here in two ways, and I want to try and be very cognizant of the fact that everybody in this room will be in the field as doctors in a very short amount of time, and you're all managing your own debt right now. So we see authority bias play a role in financial management when we go to a mentor or we go to somebody that is running a lab or somebody that's been a professor for years and they've acted as a trusted advisor. We say, hey, I have all of this student loan debt. This is what I'm planning on doing. Is that how it works? And as leaders, every leader, and probably everybody in this room considers himself a leader and probably should, we always want to have the answers. So we like to say things like, it should, it could, I would think so, which if you ever hear those phrases around hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, I would back off. I would be skeptical, and I would never give them, right? So on the one hand, be aware that authority bias may make you give weight to people's opinions who, with the best of intentions, are doing their absolute best to give you great advice. But on the other hand, when you yourself are a doctor and you are that trusted voice, realize that it's an opportunity for you to go and double check the information that you have. Instead of just saying, I absolutely understand how this works, even if you knew a year ago, and we'll talk about why it could change, but even if you knew how it worked a year ago, take that time to stop and pause and say, you know what, let's go online and look. I think it works this way, but let's just make sure. Let's verify the sources and the data. It will make you a better mentor. It will help you manage your finances in a far better way, and it'll stop that bias from spreading and that disinformation from spreading. When we talk about should, could, and I would think it works that way, what we're really getting into is the just world bias. And good people, people that like to go into fields that might not be the highest paid field in medicine, that are there to help and feed and clothe humanity, might fall into that realm of people that are, generally looking for the world to be fair, meaning that if I do my best, you should treat me in a way that I think is equitable. And in the world of finance, that does not exist. It's flat out, what contract did you sign? My favorite songwriter likes to say, the bold print giveth and the fine print taketh away, right? And that is the truth there. So you can go through, and a lot of people try and manage their debt on autopilot, where they just throw it on a payment plan, and they walk away from it for a decade, And right now, the news is littered with stories of people that go, after 7 years, I went back and looked and I had done something wrong. If you consider the fact that the average career is 40 to 45 years, if you put your debt on autopilot for 7 years and then you go back and check, that is a ton of money and time. And time is the thing you can't get back in finance. You can go do riskier things, new ventures, you can go make more money. You can't get more lifetime back. So you have to manage it very, very actively. And the last one here, I know everybody is aware of correlation bias. We talk about it all the time when it comes down to data in the lab, right? So you got one data set, you look at another data lab in the set. It's very easy to take that same principle of pattern recognition that we're hardwired to have as humans and look around at all of our peers and say, well, Dr. Tommy, he got forgiven, so we were in the same class and we're in the same field, so I should probably qualify for forgiveness as well. And you can't do it. You can't look at people that have what appear to be on the surface very similar situations to you, but you don't understand their underlying financial condition. So be aware of it. Be aware of looking around and deciding that because someone enrolled in a program and they were able to get forgiveness, you think you can as well. So with that, we'll get into the current state. One of the scarier charts in this deck is, this one is from the Federal Reserve. This is the amount of student loans owed since 2007 to 2017. And in the business world, this is either an awesome chart or a terrifying chart because it's a 45-degree angle up and to the right. So this is sales, this is bonus time, and if this is losses, this is bankruptcy time. But for us, this is just a straight trend line of how much debt Americans have incurred over the last 10 years. You can see, it starts off at $550 billion, which is not awesome, and goes up to $1.4 trillion in 2017. So this is just continuing to rise and rise and rise. And it's rising at a pretty much flat clip. There are 44 million borrowers in the U.S. that represent all of this student loan debt. The average student the average borrower owes $37,000. It's important to know that number encompasses all student borrowers in the system. So saying $37,000 does not mean people that graduated in the last 4 years are averaging $37,000. It means even the person that graduated in 1986 that's still got a $200 balance is in there, and that's a median. The average vet student is graduating with $167,000 in loans, right? Now that doesn't include people that didn't take out any loans. So if you're a zero borrower, right, you just paid your tuition, you're not in there. But for folks that borrowed any dollars to go to vet school, $167,000 is the average. And the other number to point out here, and it's a little bit off topic, but I think it's important, is $137 billion of this debt is currently in default. So default meaning it has gone so far past due, it is no longer considered viable debt. 6 months or longer, it's out there, and they're trying to figure out how to set up payment plans or how to go after it for collections. And that's important for two reasons. It's important, one, because the more debt that goes into default, the higher the interest rates have to be for future generations to be able to go to school. We're going to hear a couple of stats that, while I can't tell you they mean college, enrollments are, probably in trouble, they're at least worrying when you put them in context. The other thing that makes that worrying is because just overall financial health of our country. When you think about a $1.4 trillion debt load, and then you start thinking about the fact that a quarter of that is owned by private banks and institutions, it's not all the federal government, and then you start seeing that default rate escalate, this becomes something we all have to be interested in, not just because of our personal finances, but because of the overall health of the country, and that's where we all have to earn our living. Median wages are another worrying number. So this is the average college graduate since 1990 through 2015. Wages in the U.S. have grown 1.6%, while the average college debt has grown 164%. So wages flat, college tuition up 164% in about a 25-year period. Vet school has actually done a little bit better. So veterinary starting salaries, which are this gray line here in the center of our graph, they've gone up about 30% in the last 15 years. source for this is the AVMA marketability report. So right now in 2016, the last number we had was that the average starting salary for a veterinarian across all fields is $74,000. And when we do our financial models, that's what we'll be looking at today. Again, the median debt we'll be using for our models is $167,000. So we still have tuition costs rising far faster than we have income levels, but at least we have income levels that are moving and are not just sitting flat at 1.6%. The last slide I wanted to hit here, and I realize this is just like negative. So thank you for staying with me, and everybody seems like they're still in somewhat of a decent mood. No, nobody's crying. Is I wanted to talk about default rates, because when we talk about the financial health of our country and we talk about where this is going and you think about your chances for actually defaulting, it's important to know what past generations or what past cohorts of folks that went to college are dealing with. You see this magenta line at the bottom of this graph is the default rates for folks that entered college in 1995. You can see after 10 years, or pardon me, 25% after 20 years was the average default rate for folks that entered school in 1995. So a quarter of folks that started school in 1995 ended up defaulting on their loans after 20 years. When you look at the next cohort, which is the blue line, 2003 graduates, 25% after 11 years, trending towards 40%. If you think about that first graph we looked at, which is just a straight upward to the right at a 45-degree angle, so more debt over time. I'm not going to draw a false correlation for you, but I would say that there's at least a question to be asked and something to stay conscious of, that for this cohort of borrowers, these folks that are going to be graduating in 2018, 2019, what will the default rates look like there? So the good news is, more than half of the folks that graduate are finding a way to pay off their loans. And I know that does not sound like great news, but work with me here, right? But the bad news is, and really what you need to stay conscious of, is that gap is widening, right? The percentage of people that can pay off their loans is narrowing. So you have to take this seriously, and you have to manage it actively. It cannot go on autopilot. So we wanted to ask, why are we seeing default rates go up? Why are we seeing default rates really just skyrocket over the last 25 years? And to me, the best way to go out and get a gauge for what's happening is to go look at the three things you have to know to manage your debt. You have to know how much you owe, you have to know how much you're required to pay, and you have to know how long it will take you to pay it off, right? That's buying a car, that's anything that you finance. It's those three numbers. And Citizens Bank and the Pew Charitable Trust Foundation both just did surveys recently, and they came back with these stats for 2017. The 15% of graduates that graduated in 2017 did not know their loan balance, could not tell you how much money they had borrowed to go to school. 58% underestimated their minimum payments, so did not understand what they were going to have to pay on a monthly basis once they got out of school. And then 56% did not know when they would reach their payoff. So to me, I look at that, and what that says to me is that we're getting a failing grade in the fact that we're not educating people as they're borrowing on what it's going to take to pay it back. I don't think this is a failure on the part of students. I think this is a failure on the part of those of us that should be out there having these conversations. Ergo, skipping math skills. So the other ones that are up here that I think are really fascinating. One, less than 50% had considered refinancing. I'm not advocating refinance. That's not something I think everybody should do, but I think if you're not looking at all of your options, you're not probably actively managing your debt. And the two that really worry me from a future college enrollment perspective are that 36% of those respondents said they regretted attending college after they understood the cost. So got out, college degree, I'm about to start my life, and the feedback I'm giving you is I think I made a bad choice in going to college. That's pretty scary when you look at the fact that we're probably going to be about 11 million candidates short for high-skilled jobs over the next 10 to 15 years as a country. When you have 1/3 of respondents that just graduated college telling you, I don't think I should have done that. Again, I can't tell you what it means, but I can encourage you to ask the question as to what do we think that impact is going to be over time. The other number up here that I always find is interesting is that 38% of respondents said they had a negative view of debt. So after all that, I'm going to ask the utterly stupid question. Does everybody in here, who has a negative view of debt? Who thinks debt is not a great thing? Okay, so lots of hands. And the conventional wisdom about debt is pay it off as fast as you can. Debt is bad. Don't carry debt. Debt is awful, right? Like, has anybody ever gotten that advice or some form of that advice? I might be being a little bit hyperbolic, right? But at some point, someone has told you the best debt strategy is to have no debt. So I wanted to encourage you, and this again goes back to that debt anxiety problem. I wanted to encourage you to think about debt in the way that some of the largest companies in the world think about debt. So if you're going to think about the big dogs on the block, the companies that are just killing it right now, what companies would you say? Big companies that are sitting on a pile of cash. Apple, Amazon, anybody else? I heard a bunch of stuff in there, so I'm just going to do this. Right? So, and we could take a look at any of those, but these were the three that for me kind of spelled out the last decade. Right? Apple, Google, Microsoft. Should have put Amazon in there. It's a really good call out, but they started turning a profit like 2 years ago, so they're a little bit of an anomaly. So how do these companies that are the most successful companies in the world think about debt? Well, Apple in 2017 had a net income of $48 billion. They carried $165 billion in debt, and they had $236 billion of cash on hand. They had enough cash on hand to pay off every dollar in debt that they had and still have $70 billion to be able to do what they needed to do. Google, very similar story, $20 billion in net income for 2016. Their debt, $28 billion. They were holding cash reserves of $80.8 billion. Could have paid off their debt twice over and had $20 billion left to do projects with, activities. Microsoft. Microsoft, 2017 net income, $21.2 billion. Debt, $60 billion. Cash reserves of $113 billion. Almost enough to pay it off 2 times over again. And the question you have to ask is when you look at these companies, and again, understanding that, I don't want to step in the political pothole, understanding that companies are different from people because they don't die and they don't have a career lifespan. But understanding that companies are different from people, why would they carry this debt? Why wouldn't they just pay it off? And the answer is the companies have figured out that it is better to use debt wisely to give them more options than it is to pigeonhole themselves and paint themselves into a corner by paying off all of that debt and then trying to borrow when they're in a bad financial position. Right? You borrow when you're in a position of strength. You borrow when people think you have the momentum. In other words, you borrow when you're about to start your career. Trying to borrow the kind of money that, the average veterinary student has borrowed towards the end of your career to go back to school, not a great bet for the banks. And for me, when I think about debt, the easiest way I can put it into terms, and this often helps when we're talking to vet students, is for me, debt is a lot like pain medication. So pain medication, right, lets you do amazing things you couldn't do in many other situations, right? It minimizes shock to the system. It allows you to do more extensive procedures. And without it, you wouldn't be able to do half of those surgeries, half of those procedures, right? Now, the other side of that coin is if I go overboard on pain medication, what happens? I shock the system, I shut the system down, I could end up killing the patient or the animal. And if I use it for too long, I cause long-term systemic damage. It's a tool in your toolbox, so it shouldn't be feared, but it has to be respected and has to be used properly over time. All right. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, which is repayment strategies. We're going to look at forgiveness programs. We're going to talk about some of the dangers there. We're going to take a look at the fast repayment strategy, and we're going to take a look at what a balanced strategy looks like, and then we'll dig into the other things that we talked about. So, quick primer on loan forgiveness programs. They were enacted in 2007 and modified in 2010. I like that fact because it means it's not a partisan issue. That matters to you. It matters to a lot of people, so I like to point it out. First cohort of borrowers eligible for forgiveness began applying for forgiveness this year. We don't have any numbers on how many people's debts have been forgiven. But we know that because 10 years is the minimum amount of time that there was for a forgiveness program, 2017 would have been the first time somebody that borrowed in 2007 could have been forgiven. And we will look at some statistics on this. There are three tracks for the forgiveness programs as they stand today. PSLF, or the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, is the 10-year program everybody, I think, is pretty familiar with. There is the 20-year undergraduate, which, highlight right there, if somebody ever tells you as a grad student that the 20-year program is for you, solid red flag that that person is operating, that person is doing their best to help with incomplete information. Let's say it that way. And then the 25-year graduate program. Borrowers are eligible to have direct government student loans forgiven after meeting their requirements. No other type of loans qualify. No private loans, no side loans, and many government loans do not qualify. So what's the terminology? Direct loans are loans given directly and held by the government, and there is a full list. Like I said, we're going to go through and we'll take you through this application demonstration in a little bit, and we'll show you where to find the full list of loan types. There's probably upwards to 30 of them, so I decided not to do that to you in a slide. We have IBR and repay. Those are the two types of payment plans that will allow you to qualify for loan forgiveness options. So income-based repayment and repay is just another type of income-based repayment plan. Takes a portion of your salary after the ASL, minimum poverty requirements are met, and then you are directly contributing that to paying off your loans over a period of time. And whether it's the 10-year plan, the 25-year plan, or if you're an undergrad, which I don't think anybody in this room is, the 20-year plan, you have a certain number of payments that have to be made on time in order for you to qualify for that program. And then finally, we're going to talk about ECFs, and that's one to please make sure you pay attention to. ECFs are employment certification forms, and they're required for the 10-year PSLF. So as we take a look at these, keep those in mind. If anybody needs this up for another second, leave it up. We're good. We're going to take a look at the 10-year PSLF. So the 10-year PSLF is your public student loan forgiveness program. Qualifying seems pretty simple. It is for government employees, employees of state and federal institutions, and for folks who are employed by a 501c3, which is a bona fide, certified charitable organization. Here, oftentimes, we get into conversations that involve the just world bias, where people say, well, I work for this company and they do really good things. Unfortunately, that does not make it a 501c3. It makes it a really good company to work for, but it does not make it one that's going to qualify you for the 10-year program. You must be employed full-time, 30 hours per week at the qualifying institution. This is one of those legalese financial arguments. You must be an employee, 30 hours per week. If you work somewhere 20 hours per week, or if you're in a program where you're not considered an employee, it does not qualify you for this program, or at least that time is not qualified for this program. So again, it's the P's and Q's and understanding the specific definition of each one of these words. PhD and residency work may qualify, but again, the institution you're working at has to code you as an employee. If they code you as a student where you have no set schedule and your requirements are simply do all the work required to complete your PhD, you weren't technically an employee required to work 30 hours per week. After 10 years, you are eligible, it's an important word, to have your loans forgiven. We have not seen a list of what the eligibility requirements are. We've only seen an application to apply for forgiveness that was published in 2017. We have no data on how many people actually had their loans forgiven in 2017. But no matter what, every forgiveness program, it has to be said, is an application process. At the end of all this, even if it's a 25-year program, you're going to go through, make your payments, you're going to make payments on time, you're going to do everything right, and at the end of that, you're going to fill out an application, and based on an unknown set of criteria, you're either going to be approved or denied forgiveness. That pause is intentional, right? Because that is the same thing as buying a house, signing a contract with the bank, and the bank says, well, you can give me $30 a month, and maybe you'll be homeless in 30 years, or we could just give you the house, right? But if you can't see what's coming down the road, it is at best a sketchy strategy. So what do we know? You go into the dark reaches of the internet and start pulling reports from the Department of Education. But you can see here that there's a lot of misinformation about the 10-year program. 35% of every ECF that has been submitted since 2012 has been denied, which means 65% have been approved, but there is not a single vet student on the planet that thinks 65% is a good number. Completely aware of that. And it's not something you really want to bet your future on, right? So there's a lot of disinformation out here about this. I can't tell you whether or not this means they're very tough on ECF applications, or whether or not 35% of people just don't qualify and they're applying anyways because they're hoping it'll go through. But I can tell you, no matter what, this is a system with a 1/3 failure rate. So again, as you're doing your financial planning, you have to factor that into your risk. Looking at it from a different perspective, because I like charts, right now we have 739,000 enrollees, and an enrollee is defined by the Department of Education as an applicant with more than one approved ECF. Up to 25% of the population is considered eligible for this program, so we should expect that number to continue to grow and balloon. If you look at the trend line from a Q1 2015, Q3 2017, that's not building over time, that's just how many more applications they're getting every single quarter. So this system, that's already overburdened with $1.4 trillion in debt, is being deluged with applicants. And again, I can't tell you what that means. I can tell you that I don't think the government has $1.4 trillion just waiting to forgive everybody, right? So as you factor this in, and as you hear your peers and you hear people and you hear underclassmen saying, oh, it'll all be forgiven in 20 years anyways, take a pause and give them some good advice that they need to at least take a look at this and ask whether or not that's accurate. There have been 1.8 million applications in total, 1.2 million approved. Right now, after 10 years, I think this is the most fascinating number on this slide, 1.6 ECFs have been completed per enrollee. It takes 10 ECFs to be forgiven. So after 10 years, with 740,000 people enrolled, the average enrollee has 1.6 ECFs approved. So again, they have not published how many people's debt will be forgiven in 2017. But based on that number, I can't tell you what it means. I can encourage you to think about it, right? I don't have that answer. All right, so that is the 10-year program. Now, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau recently released a report outlining a lot of complaints from student borrowers on why they felt they were having a hard time managing their student debt. What they came back with was, first of all, as I mentioned, 25% of the American workforce are estimated to be eligible for PSLF. That is a pile of people, probably far more than the initial models called for. Complaints about incorrect information rose 325% between 2016 and 2017. And I didn't want to get super far into the weeds, so I did not put a whole section in here on loan servicers and all the complaints and the lawsuits and whatnot, but I encourage you to go do some research, because there's a very good chance, with there only being, I think, 9 total federally contracted loan servicers out there, soon to be consolidated down to 1, that's at least the proposal, that your loan servicer probably has a couple of complaints that you might want to stay aware of, because they may have some bad habits, like telling people things qualify for things and they don't, etc. Not saying they do, but you should look into it. And then of the 2,200 complaints received, 63% were regarding loan provider communication, 36% were regarding an inability to repay loans. So, and that bottom number, again, points to that escalating default rate. More and more people struggling with paying off loans, more and more people having a hard time. The 25-year program, we have no visibility to. We don't know what the application process looks like. We have not seen an ECF for the 25-year program. The 25-year program is essentially a faith-based program. It is essentially, we're going to wait until 2032, and everybody that's been enrolled in it the whole time, we're then going to tell you how forgiveness works. So we're going to tell you what the approval process is, and we'll start knocking it out. But again, it is not a guarantee. It is not something that is just, hey, check mark in the box, and after 25 years, all my debts go away. And I recognize that that information is out there, and I am sorry if any of you got that and you made decisions based on that. But all we can do is just share the most accurate information and help you make the best decisions from today forward. So if you're out there feeling a little bit frustrated, totally get it. But, hang with us, and we'll see where we can go from here. Pretty similar to the 10-year PSLF, actually a lot cleaner, right? So it's available on direct loans, paying for IBR. You may have government loans and think they're direct loans. You may be wrong. So step one for using forgiveness, if forgiveness is part of your plan, is to make sure you have direct loans. And you can consolidate them, and you can consolidate them down into a direct loan package at no charge. The government gets that, and they will just put it into one big bucket for you and let you be enrolled. But a lot of those news stories you see right now about people that went, 5, 6, 7 years making payments, and they said, hey, I thought I qualified, and I didn't actually qualify. It's because they didn't have their loans in the right category. So as you get out of school, or even now, make the call your loan servicer, find out, then after that call back and make sure that person gave you the right information. It is that important. It is that important. Payments are based on discretionary income, and when we go through the application, when we go through discretionary income, I'll walk you through what the calculator looks like, but essentially it is 150% of the poverty line based on your family size. So if you look at ALS, right, the ALS website, the Labor Services website, they have a table that says for a family of one, your poverty line is, I believe it's $11,500 per year. 150% of that, right around $16,000 per year. Every dollar you make over $16,000 a year, that's what your payment will be based on. This is another huge area of misconception for students because a lot of people think, well, my discretionary income is what's left after my car and my rent. No. It's literally that bare minimum, what you need to survive, and then 10% or maybe 15%, depending on your income bracket, after that. Balances are forgiven at the end of 25 years following an application process. And this is really the answer to why I do these talks. Any balance forgiven is taxed as income the year it is forgiven. And when you model that out, that is a terrifying number. Even if forgiveness just worked the way forgiveness was designed to work and everybody was approved, I'll show you on the next slide, I believe, what that dollar figure looks like. Okay. The red line at the top is the balance over time. You will notice on a forgiveness plan, this is all based on those vet numbers that we talked about, $167,000 in debt, $74,000 in income. We're charging you 20% tax in this model. We adjust your income up 2.2%, assuming that you're getting merit raises every year. And we tell you what you made in payments. And we are using the standard calculator from the ALS to come up with your payments. So if you decide you're going after forgiveness, you're going to make your minimum payments, kicks into autopilot. This is what it looks like. You start off right around $167,000. As you can see over here, on the left-hand side of the screen, the red line again. Your payments never touch your principal. So if you're on an income-based repayment plan, and you're doing the 10% of your discretionary income, and you make what the average veterinarian makes, and you have the average veterinarian debt, you will never lower your debt over a 25-year arc. By the time you get to the end of 25 years, you will have racked up $450,000 in debt based on interest accruing for more than 2.5 decades. And you will owe $89,000 in taxes the year it's forgiven. And that bill is due when received. So again, this is why my buddy Mike and I went, wow, this is a really, really, really big problem. We should probably go talk to people about this. So up here at the top, your average payment, if you're, family size of one, right? You get out of school, it's going to change over time. Just starting off, family size of one, your payment would be $416 a month. You would have your debt forgiven of $240,000 if you qualified for the 10-year program, which is why we've got our oval here. 10-year program is the only program that does not have taxes on it, so that is why it is by far the best option if you can get it. But remember the stats we just looked at? Not necessarily looking like that's a super bright spot, but at least it's a good safety net. Total cost of your education at that point would be $60,780. So you would save $110,000 if you got that option. That's by far the best option inside of this entire framework. If you went for the 25-year forgiveness plan, you did not go into a government role, you went into private practice, or you went and you worked in the corporate side of the industry, and you let it ride for 25 years, and you made minimum payments the whole time, and it rose commensurately with your income, you pay $416 a month. The debt forgiven would be $443,000. You would owe $89,000 in taxes, and when we add your taxes and your payments over time up, your education would have cost you $253,000. So I'm going to pause here and just point out, again, I can't tell you what to do, but when I look at this graph and we look at all the information we've looked at, I would point out that the way I interpret it is that forgiveness programs are meant as a safety net. They were meant as a way for people that went into the system with the best of intentions, that wanted to build a career. They were meant for those people to not get trampled after 20 years. My point is not that forgiveness programs don't work. My point is that if you're in a system where you're actively being told the rules could change, and probably will change, making a 20-year bet on them as your only strategy, in my mind, is ill-advised. But trying to find a way to balance them and say, hey, you know what if I were able to do a little bit of X? If I get forgiven, that's great. But if I don't get forgiven, I didn't crash myself into $500,000 worth of debt in my 50s, might be another way to go. So changes, I just went through with the new tax bill. The tuition waiver tax exemption remains intact. If you don't know what that is, as you go through and you pay your taxes, any dollars that you spent towards tuition or spent towards student loan interest, you can write that off. So you can actually get a tax break for being a student and being in debt. I think one of the smarter strategies you can utilize is to take your tax refund from that particular break and invest it towards your tax liability 20 years down the road if you're going to go towards forgiveness. Employer assistance for tuition remains not taxable. So if you go into a residency and they're paying for your school, or you are receiving compensation that is considered tuition, because you're going on for a board certification, in that case, that will not be taxed as income. That was part of what was up for discussion as well. And then the student loan interest deductions again. $2,500 in deductions for single earners making up to $80,000. $5,000 per year can be deducted for couples making up to $165,000. So potential changes. Current budget proposal documents do propose ending the 10-year PSLF enrollment in 2017. There are two answers to the question as to whether or not folks will be grandfathered in. They are yes and no. So the answer is we do not know if you are in school right now, if you will actually qualify for 10-year forgiveness, if the Prosper Act goes through. I know what the acronym says up here, but I'm just going to, promoting real opportunity, success, and prosperity through educational reform. People love acronyms. All right. What does the Prosper Act actually do? The Prosper Act eliminates direct loans. It creates the one loan program, so every loan the government originates is just coming out under one giant bucket, which is, there's pros and cons on both sides of that, not necessarily something that's going to impact you moving forward as you graduate early, but it will prepare you for your conversations that you have with your associates in your practice and the people that will be coming to you for advice for the next year or two. Creates limits for graduate and undergraduate borrowing. So dependent undergraduates could borrow $39,000 in their lifetime, independent undergraduates $60,000, and grad students $28,500 per year and a $150,000 lifetime cap, which looks awesome on paper because it means you're going to get to stop that 45-degree angle chart that we started at the beginning because there's going to be less funds available, right? And schools will have to adjust. Nope. I got a bunch of people shaking their head now. That's right. What all this is really going to do is it's going to push people into taking out private loans that aren't eligible for forgiveness, that are at higher rates. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but be aware that that is out there. It does cap interest paid to 10 years, which to me is the smartest thing that you can do in this scenario. So after paying interest for 10 years, no more interest is accrued. It just puts you in a position to pay everything off. So I think it is a common sense measure that makes really good sense. And it introduces the 15% IVR program. So instead of 10% of your annualized income, you would be at 15% of your annualized income. So what are the advantages of a forgiveness debt strategy? It is potentially the most cost effective. It requires minimal payments. I'm popular, what do you want? Very hard. Requires minimal payments and allows for a higher quality of life. The highest quality of life that you can have with any of the strategies we're going to cover today. Because you're going to actually have enough dollars because you're making such low payments to go do things like vacation and buy a home and start a practice and save for retirement and have a nest egg. Right? You're going to have the most flexibility under these plans. The risks, however, as with anything, the reward and the risks are pretty paralleled. The big one is that they're not guaranteed. Right? This is a promise of getting up to the altar and you say I do and your future spouse is standing up there and they say, you know, have and honor and hold and cherish. And the preacher says, do you? And they say, I might. I might. Feeling pretty good about it right now. But maybe not, right? So just go into it with your eyes open. Really, the program's future is uncertain. You're not eligible for refinance. This is one of the biggest errors we see in that should, could, would conversational line. You know, I told somebody to go refinance all their loans, but they'll still be qualified for forgiveness. That is just a huge, you know, visible from space red flag of no, that is not accurate. And once you refinance, essentially, you can't get back into the direct loan system. You're going to carry large long-term balances, and your tax liability could become a surprise cost, especially if you go through a period of unemployment, or for some reason you're not enrolled in the right loans. Remember, what I put up there is how it's supposed to work. That's with nothing going wrong. So $500,000, that's what it's set up to do. That's not if interest, you know, charges get hiked or you decide to roll something over or you get, you know, a special offer one day and they say, hey, lower your payments by $100 this month and it just seems like a good thing. That's not factored in. Tactics to make this strategy work. Know the program to stay aware of changes. Complete annual certifications. I would recommend quarterly certifications if you can. I would stay on top of this like crazy. I'd have a Google alert set up for, you know, forgiveness programs, whichever one you're pursuing, but I would really, really be crazy about it. Consolidate loans into qualifying loans early and do it properly. Check with studentloan.gov prior to making any changes. Plan for tax liability early. And I'm going to say the phrase, stay disciplined at the end of every one of these. Because every debt strategy requires that you actually follow through on what you say you're going to do. We like to get a little bit more comfortable every year in our lives, and we like to back off a little bit. As we pay it out of balance, we get more comfortable with it. That debt anxiety goes away. That heaviness in your chest starts to go away. You've had it for 10 years, it's okay. So it's okay to spend $200 less and then $250 less. And when you do that, you're just stretching yourself out and carrying risk longer than you should. So that's forgiveness. I'm going to pause there. Are there any, and we're going to do questions at the end as well, but I don't want to jump off of this. Everybody's got to be burning questions before we get into alternative, just, hey, pay off your debt strategy. So any burning questions out there? Okay.
I have a question. So what is the government, so if it limits, say, vet school students to $150,000, and a student starts out and reaches that $150,000, and then they can't pay their tuition, so they're going to be forced to go to private loans and pay a ridiculous interest rate and have none of the safety nets that the government loans have. Is that what they're proposing in this?
I don't think that's what they're proposing. I think what so the question was, if a lifetime cap of $150,000 is put in place, would students have nowhere to go but to go to private lenders in order to finish school? And I don't think that's the intent. I think that is one of the potential outcomes. Right? There's a lot of talk right now about the fact that we have reinvented the college experience in the last, call it 15 or 20 years. It used to be, you know, very, you know, it was okay to go to college part-time. And I know this is not a veterinarian. I get that. You know, I know you can't do anatomy like, you know, every Tuesday and Thursday for 8 months. But part of the thought process there is it would be pushing people back into a system where it was more all right to take 6 or 8 years to get through college if you wanted to pay for part of it yourself by having a second job. Really, where veterinarians in the veterinary field are in danger is because this is one of those fields where that is not a practical application. And as we look at the tuition rates over time and the borrowing over time, I can't tell you that chart's going to keep going that way. It really looks like it is, but I can't guarantee that. But if it does keep going that way, people will have no choice, to your point, to either borrow money from friends and family. There are new programs out there that I personally, we're not going to go into them today, but I consider them terrifying, where parents can mortgage their homes to send their kids to school, where parents can accept, lifetime lock debt to send their kids to school. So those sorts of programs will become more prevalent in order to fill that gap. Because again, not in the not on the deck, but we had the VLC this year, and I remember one of the conversations we had with one of the administrators for the AVMA. She was talking about research recently that essentially they went out to a bunch of vet students and said, how much would you pay to be a vet? And you guys are so passionate, and this is what you want to do so badly. There was literally no stopping line. They got up to would you pay $80,000 a year to go to vet school? And people were like, absolutely. This is what I've wanted to do since I was 7 years old. It's what I'm going to do. Get out of my way. And that makes this dangerous for everybody in this room, right? But not just for everybody in this room. In 10 years, again, when you're teaching the classes and when you're running the clinics, it is going to be spectacularly dangerous for the people that are coming to you and trusting you to give them the advice to help them build their lives. So just stay aware. I'm going to talk about all student strategies because I think there's some bright spots in here. I feel like I owe you some. All right, so look at that red line. How much better does that red line look, right? So we're going to look at two different alternate payment strategies. One is called the fast debt strategy. One is the balanced debt strategy. And really, they're just to give you the two extremes that you might choose to go down, right? Again, not advocating either of these as the ideal strategy, but some people decide, hey, paying my debt off immediately is what's going to make me happiest. Other folks say, hey, you know what, I want a long, slow burn. And probably everybody in here is going to go for somewhere in the middle, right, which is probably the common sense place to be. But this is what the fast debt strategy looks like. The numbers are shown by the end of the year. And what we did for this one is we took those exact same numbers, $74,000 starting income, $167,000 in debt. And we said if you were to pay every dollar you possibly could. Did I miss something?
No, I'm just thinking about paying $3,000 a month.
Exactly. Right? It's good you can laugh at the pain. $3,000 a month is as high as we felt like we should push this for this model without you living in a van down by the river. So this is still making some pretty serious cuts, right? It's leaving yourself $1,933 per month after taxes to live on. And if you went this route, you went as hard as you could, nothing ever went wrong in your lives. You got no safety net. Your dog's not getting sick. Your cat's not getting sick. Your car's not breaking down. You're riding a bicycle. You're walking everywhere. You become a spokesperson for ramen. You do all that, at the end of 5 years, you will have paid off your debt, and you would have done it for a cost of $204,000. Now, again, this is something you may choose to try and do, but there is a comfort bias that will impact you here. Because what's happening while you're trying to do this? Life. And you're starting your career, which I can tell you, since my wife's been out of school for the last year and a half, is not super fun. Like, they don't ease you into that. They take you out and start hitting you over the head immediately because they figure you're used to it after the 4th year. So I'm kidding. Everything is wonderful with my wife's residency, and she is super happy. We're going to edit this out of what's going on the web. Anyways, but yeah, life is happening. So how long could you live going through the most stressful part of your career, giving yourself no disposable income? So you will. You will experience comfort bias as you go through this. You will pay this down, and maybe you make it 2 years. Maybe you are just the Jedi Knight of on-time bill payment, and you do 24 months, and you just crush it. At the end of that 2 years, you're going to come back and go, you know what? I'm going to take this down to $2,000 because I've earned it, because now my balance is lower, because I'm a little bit more comfy, because I can get away with it, right? Because I've taken care of it. And then maybe after 2.5 years, you're going to come back and you go, you know what? I'm going to knock it down to $1,800 because I need this new car. My old car got me through vet school. I got to do this. It's an imperative. Or you may let the words doctor lifestyle sneak into your vocabulary, which I do hear when I talk to people. I'm like, that's not a consideration when you're doing this. But the chances of you being able to pull this off and do this on an absolute lateral downward curve, I would say they're pretty low. Without help, you may have other financial help out there that could help you do this. And if that's the case, that's awesome. But this is a super aggressive strategy. So if you do this, what I would tell you is just be aware of the pros and cons, right? It is the fastest repayment possible. It could be aided by refi. So if you do refi your loans, which should be considered under the right types of plans. And when I say right types of plans, I'm really sorry there's another slide on this, so I'm just going to tell you to write this down if you're taking notes, and if not, just really perk up here. But if you refinance your loans, make sure you do it on a fixed rate repayment plan, and make sure you do it with a reputable lender that will not sell your debt. I think it's important enough to say twice. Fixed interest repayment plan, reputable lender that will not sell your debt. The reason why is because right now, interest rates are at all-time lows. They're starting to creep up. But you may be getting offers already that say, hey, refinance your student loan debt at 2%, right? You won't pay any interest. But if it's variable, what that means is in 6 years, when the national LIBOR rate or when the Bank of England LIBOR rate shoots up to 10%, you're going to get a whole new bill in the mail. And you're not going to know why all of a sudden you went from paying $400 a month to $800 a month. And if you built your budget out around one payment, having a fluctuating student loan payment that they can just bowl at you whenever they feel like it is not a great strategy. So fixed rate, reputable. Again, sorry there's not a slide for that. Minimal interest cost over time, and it does not rely on forgiveness programs. It is the shortest financial window of uncertainty. Those are the pros. The cons, really low quality of life. We talked about that. It's cost prohibitive. You have no flexibility. And the lower the potential payment, the greater the risk, right? So again, that comfort piece where you decide, you know what, it's Friday, it's movie time. I'm going to go out, I'm going to treat myself. And over time, you start to chip away at your strategy. Tactics to make this strategy work. One, minimize borrowing. That note is really there, not for those of you in this room, even though if you can minimize any more borrowing, it's a good thing to look at. But it's more for those people that will be coming to you for advice as leaders over the next 3 to 5 years. When somebody comes and goes, yep, you know, just got my tuition rebates, I'm going to Belize, I'm going to do a learning trip, and I'm going to stop by Nicaragua, and, maybe that's the thing, right? But maybe you want to say, hey, maybe pump your brakes, think about what that costs over 30 years, right? Because we do see those things, especially in an environment where people are getting told, hey, it all gets forgiven in 25 years anyways. It's really tempting to go live it up a little bit because there's this sense out there that's free money, right? So we have to fight against that and give people the right context. Minimizing expenses, things like sharing housing, carpooling, single-family vehicles, living on one income for couples. And the big one, stay disciplined, right? If you decided to do this, this strategy is only viable as a short-term solution. You hamstring yourself and you just kind of nibble away at it. The longer you do that with no nest egg, no retirement savings, no ability to handle emergencies, the higher level of risk you're at that you're going to break your leg and you can't go to the clinic, that you're going to have some sort of emergency that requires you to take 3 to 6 months off work to take care of a spouse or a family member. And at that point, you have painted yourself into a corner by being too aggressive. So you have to stay disciplined on this kind of plan. The balanced debt strategy is probably the one that most people identify with. Again, we've got our big red line that arcs down to zero beautifully after 25 years. You get your payments over time, the blue dotted line, interest cost. should have done better colors on these, but interest cost is this interesting chocolate brown line, and then your payments are down here. You can see they do go up over time as you earn more and more. We take a look at what this looks like, right? You will have paid off your debt at a cost of $936 a month, your starting payment. Over 25 years, you'll take home $4,000 per month. Pretty all right to live on. Pretty okay, right? It's not $5,000, which it would have been if you hadn't, had student loan debt, but it's not $2,000 either, right? Takes 25 years, and the total cost is $364,000. So again, this is the most expensive overall strategy, but it also gives you the most flexibility for quality of life, and it also gives you an ability to save for retirement, buy a home, do some of those things. The other thing I love about the balanced strategy is that you can do things like, I'm going to go work at a 501c3 for 10 years. And right here at this point in the graph, if I qualify for forgiveness, I get $150,000 forgiven. My interest isn't going crazy over time. I'm not letting my balance build to $500,000, but I can still pursue forgiveness, right? So ideas like that and taking a practical approach where you can actually go in and still try and take advantage of some of the programs that are out there without letting this chart just flip completely upside down, if you remember the first forgiveness chart we looked at, make a lot of sense and should be considered. The advantage to this, of course, not all or nothing, could be aided by refinancing again if you can get down to that lower rate without going for a variable rate and going with an irreputable lender. I would encourage it. Does not rely on forgiveness programs, but can integrate, allows for quality of life, allows for savings. It is the highest interest cost over time, and it carries interest for a longer period of time, which means there is a larger risk to potential emergency expenses. So again, if you're going to carry $200,000 for 25 years, you've got to have a backup plan. You've got to have some funds set aside to be able to handle if your spouse tries to remodel the bathroom and cuts off a finger or whatever else comes along that might cost you a pile of money or some time. You can't be painted into a corner. I'm not going to repeat all of these because I think they're pretty, I've said a lot of them, but the big one here is to have a safety net, 3 to 6 months salary, to perform your annual checkups to make sure you're on track, and to stay disciplined with your strategy. To make sure that as you look at it, you realize it's not about adjusting over time, it's about sticking to it and watching the balance adjust over time. The summary on this one is your debt strategy has 3 really key components. It should consider both short and long-term goals. You need to have a life. You're only going to get to do this once. If you spend 20 years worrying about debt, get to 48 years old, and then all of a sudden you're able to live your life because you can take home most of your paycheck, you're going to go buy a red Corvette and drive it around the subdivision. That is just a guaranteed thing that will happen, right? So consider both short and long-term goals. What do you want to do now? What do you want to do later? Allow for flexibility for the unknown. We love to look at what's going to be great in life. We have a really hard time with blind spots. But I guarantee you, everybody in this room, as much as I hate to say these things, will experience somebody that you love getting sick. You will have a period of time off work. You will have something that happens that interrupts the perfect plan. And you have to plan for it. Because if that's in there, the plan can still be perfect. You just included some flexibility. And it weighs the immediate cost of a goal versus the long-term cost of repayment. So again, is it worth it to spend 25 years repaying your student loans at a far higher cost? Depends on what you want to do with the dollars that you have freed up along the way. Because literally what you're doing is you're not freeing up dollars, you're freeing up freedom. You're freeing up flexibility. You're freeing up your ability to make choices. And over your timeline in life, you have to decide what that's worth to you. Pitfalls. Things to watch out for. Debt consolidation is very tricky. When you call, I mentioned earlier, when you call and somebody goes, yes, this absolutely qualifies for exactly what you want to do, call back immediately and go, hey, person B, I just heard from person A, does this qualify for exactly what I wanted to do? And if you get the same answer, you should be in pretty good shape. But do your own research and make sure that if you're either consolidating your debt or you're refinancing, you're getting the right information. Refinancing, again, they say if you want to drive a point home, you got to say it 3 times in the presentation. So again, no variable rates and with a reputable company. Make sure you don't fall into that trap. You will also see over the next 10 years that loan assistance programs are going to be coming after you in an unparalleled way. Like I said, I work in the finance field. I read a lot of journal papers, and right now the scumminess around this particular topic is just awe-inspiring. There's an article every day. It's like there's so much money to be made in the student loan field. Like, man, that is just dark. But they are out there and they're plotting and they're figuring out how to come after you and how to explain to you why their program is the right program to help you get out of debt. So approach it with caution. There will be a few good companies out there. But no matter who comes in to talk to you, you have to ask the question, does this person know what they're talking about and what does this person have to gain? It goes for me too. So if you want to talk about it afterwards, I'm happy to answer questions. But you have to be cynical in this process. Your tax liability is a pitfall, and not having enough money saved for retirement is a serious concern for this particular generation. Save this one for last because it's always a little bit sketchy, and I added this since you saw this presentation. So Emory University and Harvard, which I have no reason not to trust, recently at the end of the year published 2 papers stating what the percentages were for folks who were able to get student loans forgiven as part of bankruptcy proceedings. This should not be part of your primary strategy. This would be like safety net 2 underneath forgiveness plans, if I were telling you what to do, which I'm not, just making suggestions. But if you get to a place where the balance is out of control, where you don't have any way to have quality of life, where you are experiencing what is considered an unbearable financial hardship, which is the actual legal term that they use to determine whether or not your student loans qualify for bankruptcy. I feel like I'm phrasing this like the intro to the A-Team. You may qualify for bankruptcy. There's been a 40% success rate following appeal, a recent Harvard study found, if you meet that specific requirement of an unbearable hardship, meaning you can't even support yourself. So let's be clear about that. But they also found that 99% of borrowers do not even file for bankruptcy because they're unaware of the protection. So many student borrowers file for bankruptcy and don't include their student loan debts in there because they are aware that student loan debts don't qualify for bankruptcy protection. So just know, if you take a little kernel out of this talk tonight, you get 2 decades down the road and you don't remember me or this room or anything else, and if you find yourself in bad financial straits, I hope it's there in the back of your head that as you're planning and trying to figure out what to do, you can go, I think actually, if you're that far down that dark road, that you can say, you know what, we should probably look into bankruptcy. It's a thing that could help us out. Again, this is not the primary strategy or even part of the secondary strategy, but you should know every option and every tool that's in your toolkit to manage this as you go forward. Not required, but if you'd like to, I'd like to take you through a demonstration of the application that we put together for you guys on iOS and Android. It's available on both app stores by searching the words Student Loan Advisor. I know, we are not in marketing, so that is not a super creative name, but it is somewhat memorable. So if you search for Student Loan Advisor, we spelled it with the English O, again, because I have some weird taste when it comes down to writing. The Student Loan Advisor, you can download it really quickly, and we'll take you through what that looks like. All right, so when you get into the application, you're going to see 4 welcome screens. You can go ahead and scroll through those, read them. And essentially, it is, hey, put in your financial information, figure out what your payment's going to be, get some recommendations. Then you have the disclaimer screen that essentially says, this app doesn't guarantee any kind of outcomes. Please don't use this, in 1980 and then come back in 2000 and yell at us, especially since there weren't smartphones then, right? So after you hit agree and continue, you're going to be taken to your dashboard. Your dashboard has 3 primary buttons. You have forgiveness and strategy, you have federal statistics, and you have student loan news. I'm going to point these out in the wrong order on purpose. If you click on federal statistics and go to more details, you'll be able to find all of the stats that we covered in this presentation today on ECFs. You'll be able to see all the approval rates. We'll be updating these on a quarterly basis as the Department of Education puts these out. So again, as you're talking to young vets, as you're talking to undergrads, as you're talking to people that need your guidance, and we talked about going back and verifying when you say, I think it should work this way, we are trying to make, I think it should work this way, really easy for you to do. Right? We're trying to make it easy for you to just pull it out of your pocket and go, okay, this year, I'm sorry, I was just flashing a black screen at a bunch of people. This year, this is what the stats look like, right? And as you scroll down, you can even get into the detailed tables that feed all of those graphs. If you go to student loan news, you'll see where we've been posting any pertinent updates to student loans over the last few months. This is a new feature, so there's not a lot in the news feed. But as new developments happen, credible new developments, right? I don't believe in posting news stories that say may, could, would, or should. I believe in posting news stories that say this was proposed, this will happen, this is what's going to go on, because I think anything that's opinion or potential is potentially disinformation, right? But again, you have a source for news on student loans. And then if you click on the forgiveness and strategy section, this will take you through the process of actually determining what your particular loan strategy could look like. So at the top on the right-hand side, in a not super conspicuous place, is a little toggle that says Add Direct Loans. If you click that toggle open, your first line will say loan amount in dollars. I would recommend everybody puts in $167,000 because that is our average student loan debt for a veterinarian. It'll also give you a chance to put in your interest rate. The average student loan interest rate is 6.5%. I would tell you, you can put in every loan that you have one by one in this application, and it will weight it out the exact same way that the government weights out your interest rates. But for the purposes of our demonstration, I would just say $167,000 weighted out at 6.5% interest. And then once you have it in there, you can hit the little blue bar at the bottom that says Add to My Loans, and you should see it pop up at the bottom of the screen, 167 at 6.5. You'll also notice there's a little toggle right there on the screen that says I have graduate school loans. This is the toggle that turns off your 20-year option. This is the toggle that says that program no longer exists for you. So you can hit that. And then when you're done with that, you hit the Continue button. It'll pop you over to your income screen. Again, I would recommend an income of $74,000 just for the purposes of our demonstration. But you also have the option to put in other income. You also have the option to put in a different family size. Everything in this application functions on the same government tables that are available on the studentloan.gov website and uses the same tables and calculations that you'll find on those websites. The difference is we made some more common sense adjustments to the numbers. So for instance, when I first started this effort, I really thought, I was like, well, there must be a calculator out there for people to use. It would be absolutely nuts if there wasn't. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why would they do that? So I went and I found the FAFSA calculator, and the FAFSA calculator gives you a raise of 5.5% every year, the entire year you're working, which is an insane amount of merit increases for you to get. It really does just take you from making $50,000 a year to like $250,000 a year in 20, 25 years. It's utterly unrealistic. And it also says no one's ever going to need forgiveness, right? So that's why this became necessary. So go ahead and put that in. I've got my family size as 2. You might put your family size in as 1. Other income, trusts, rentals, etc. You could put that in there. And if you hit the advanced button, it will let you put in your spouse's income. We did not tackle spouse's income because spouse's income is a whole bird's nest of crazy, right? Because your spouse very well may have student loans of their own and their own issues and their own payment terms and everything else. And if I'm just being honest, it's just 2 guys putting together an application, and we could not figure out how to make all of that work, and it'd be a good experience for anybody for it not to be confusing. So you can enter your spouse's income. but there's no place to enter your spouse's debt, right? So your spouse's student loan debt. So you can play with it if you like, but I would recommend just going with your own for right now. And you'll see at the bottom, the second you enter in your income and your family size, you get a payment of $416.42 down at the bottom right above the blue continue button. A couple of other things to point out on here. Anywhere you see a blue eye, if you click on it, you're going to get taken to a screen that is an automatic feed off of the FAFSA website. So studentloan.gov makes their changes to their website, and then this application actually pulls that text directly from the FAFSA website. So we don't have to update it. It's just always updated in real time. When you hit continue, you're going to go to the analysis screen. The analysis screen is currently what we're revamping because the analysis screen runs on flat fiscal rationality, which is just a really nice way of saying it makes what's cheapest first. All right? So it will give you scenarios from 1 through 5 or 1 through 6, and it'll say this is how much this one costs. So your top strategy would be X, Y, or Z. Your top strategy will always be the 10-year forgiveness program in this app. So keep in mind what we've covered. But if you click on any one of those, if you click on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, it will take you into a much deeper analysis. It will tell you what the program looks like. You have a screen that looks like this. It will tell you what the pros and cons of that strategy are. And again, I got there just by clicking on any one of these scenarios. You go do the deep dive. It'll tell you what the tax concerns are. It will automatically calculate what the taxes are based on your entry. It will tell you how much you need to save every year in order to offset that tax liability. It will give you a ton of good information for planning. It will not give you all the answers, but it will let you really go in and start understanding what your financial obligations look like. And then at the top, the last thing I'll point out is if you want your own visuals and your own table, if you click on the Visuals tab at the top, it will take you to a graph of what your payment looks like over time, what your interest looks like over time, and it will take you to a straight payment table all the way down through 25 years, including a breakout of the interest, the payment, and your taxes due over time. You guys have been super awesome. You guys have been engaged. Nobody got really upset. There was nobody yelled. You guys are having yourself for mattresses. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Why are you